Hello, this is the Reverend Carlton E. Smith. I'm a member of the Congregational Life staff for our Unitarian Universalist Association, and I want to welcome you to Compassionate Communication, an alternative to violent speech. So I'll begin by saying just a few brief words about myself. I've been an ordained minister in our Unitarian Universalist Association for 25 years now. It will be 25 years in October of 2020. Very grateful for all that time. And over that time, I've had a chance to work with many congregations and offer a version of this workshop in many different settings. And I'm grateful to be able to offer it here at our first virtual General Assembly. I was introduced to compassionate communication while I was the minister of a congregation some years back, and we were in the midst of a leadership crisis. We had a lay leader who came in and presented to those of us who were on the staff the book, Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life. This is my very old copy of that book here. And I'm so grateful that it was introduced to me and the rest of those staff members. It was so powerful that for all these many years later, I've continued to share it with people across the country, in fact. As we get underway, I do want to say just a few words about the author of this book. His name was Marshall Rosenberg. He died a few years ago, and we can credit him for giving us this tool, this resource to be able to communicate more effectively in a way that is more compassionate and just. And I use compassionate communication rather than nonviolent communication. It's just a personal preference of mine, because I feel when I say compassionate communication, I'm speaking to that which I want to see more of in the world rather than that which I don't want to see more of. And when I say nonviolent communication, I feel as if I'm recreating violence in an effort to be opposed to it. So I'd rather just speak of compassionate communication, though they can be used and are often used interchangeably. So we give a hat tip at the beginning of this to Marshall Rosenberg. I will give you a summary now of what nonviolent communication and compassionate communication is. It's a language of life that connects us with our compassionate selves, enriches communication, helps resolve conflict within ourselves and with others, and reduces physical, emotional, and verbal violence in the world. There are four essential parts of compassionate communication, and they are these: to observe without a judgment. It sounds like a relatively simple thing to do, but it actually takes a bit of practice to be able to do it. So often what we do is make an observation with judgment attached to it. The second step is to identify the feelings associated with that observation. Third, we identify the needs that those feelings represent. And lastly, we make a request that's in the best interest of everyone who's involved. And you'll see in a moment how these pieces fit together in an example I will share with you from my very real life experience. These are some examples of feelings that you might experience when your needs are being met. You might feel affectionate, confident, excited, hopeful, happy, grateful, delighted. These are examples of feelings when your needs are not being met, feeling sad or tense, confused, disconnected, afraid, tired, upset, angry, or annoyed. When we speak of needs, these could be some basic needs that you would have: the need for food, water, air, shelter, physical safety, exercise, rest, sexual expression, and touch. And then if we're speaking of higher level needs, they might be these: the need for acceptance, independence, honesty, integrity, closeness, respect, emotional safety, support, fun, trust, empathy, I left out an A there, sorry about that, harmony, and order. And this is the essential format for compassionate communication. When, and then there's where the observation without judgment goes, I feel, and then the feeling without judgment goes in that next slide, because my need, the need that you have goes there. And then lastly, would you be willing to, and that's where the request goes inside of a basic compassionate communication. I want to say from the outset that this is the standard format. Of course, as you go along, there's a way of communicating compassionate communication that's outside of this. But for the purpose of this offering today, we're going to stick closely to this essential compassionate communication, nonviolent communication format. Before we get to our example, I just want to say a few words about jackal and giraffe. If you go onto YouTube or online to the Center for Nonviolent Communication, that's cnvc.com, I think it is, it might be .org. You'll see that Marshall Rosenberg often used the example of the jackal and giraffe to make his points about what were sort of like the essential modes of being for human beings are as we relate to one another in conversations. So we'll first take a moment to look at the jackal. The jackal has sharp teeth and is associated with aggression, competition, domination, and power over. The goal of the jackal is to be right, to win, to be perfect. And then on the other hand, we have giraffe. The giraffe is the land mammal with the hugest heart because it has to pump all of that blood through that neck into the brain. It's associated with equality, cooperation, acceptance, power with instead of power over. And the goal of the giraffe is to understand, to learn, and to be progressively less stupid. And in his examples, Marshall Rosenberg will often use hand puppets, or would often use hand puppets to make his points about jackal and giraffe and have them in conversation with each other as they try to come to a shared understanding. Meanwhile, back at the Airbnb, this is a real example from my life. I was offering this compassionate communication workshop in Greenville, South Carolina, and I was staying at an Airbnb, a very nice one. It was a unit, sort of studio that was above a garage behind a nice house. And this is what I found one day on the evening that I came back, the first night from having worked with the group that I was working with. It was this bedspread. And for those of you who might not have any concerns about this bedspread, I'll tell you what my concerns were. It's this emblem of Chief Wahoo, as this mascot is known for this team. And it was just something that was on my bed when I got there. When I unfolded it, I was actually kind of surprised to see it there. So I could have not said anything about it and just gone along with it, even though I do find it objectionable, and we'll get to those reasons in a moment. But I decided to take it as an opportunity to talk about or to use it as an example of how compassionate communication can work in a real life setting. So let's talk about that for a moment. So again, the 4 steps of compassionate communication are to make an observation without judgment, to identify feelings associated with that observation, to talk about the needs behind those feelings, and to make a request that's in the interest of everyone involved. And so with that, this is the format again in that context. As we mentioned before, give you a moment to look at that. And flowing that current situation with the blanket into this format, this is what I came up with. It actually said to the homeowner, the landlord for this Airbnb setting, when I unfolded the blanket and saw Chief Wahoo, I was saddened because for me, he represents a disregard for First Nations people, and I need to be in spaces that affirm their humanity or are at least neutral. Can you provide me with a different blanket or comforter for tonight? So you can see there the observation without judgment. When I unfolded the blanket and saw Chief Wahoo, I was saddened. There's the feeling component. And then here comes the need, because for me, he represents a disregard for First Nations people, and I need to be in a space that affirms their humanity or are at least neutral. And now here's the request. It's in the best interest of everyone involved. Can you provide me with a different blanket or comforter for tonight? And I say it's in the best interest for everyone involved because for me as a guest in the house, I would feel better and more comfortable being in under a blanket that didn't have Chief Wahoo on it. And for him as a person who is seeking good reviews for his Airbnb unit, he wants someone like me who was a paying customer to be able to say that the landlord, that the owner of the unit was willing to work with me when I raised specific concerns about what my needs were. So that was my offering in that situation. And to let you know how it turned out, the owner was very generous, got me a different blanket, and it was, we didn't have any problems around this at all. But this is just an example of how compassionate communication and how it can be an alternative to violent language. I could have called this person many different names for having presented me with this blanket, or found different adjectives, but that's really not what this was about. This is about trying to work towards a situation that worked for everyone involved. So this is just a little example of what that can look like in daily practice. Again, give you a moment to look at this. So now that you've had a little taste of what compassionate communication might look like in your day-to-day life, I wanted to offer you some suggestions about what you might do next to go further into this practice, if you like. I would recommend that you check out at the library or buy a copy of the book Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life by Marshall B. Rosenberg. It's probably available in digital form online, I would guess as well. I don't have a version of that, but I would imagine that it would be. You can, and with this book, you can establish an individual practice or study for yourself. There are exercises in the book that you can go through and help you figure out and understand when you're making an observation without judgment, when you've identified feelings, when you've clarified what needs are, and the ability to ask a question or to make a request that's in everyone's best interest. You can do a congregational practice group, even one on a platform like Zoom, which I'm using to record on now. I can imagine it could be done on a conference call as well, but we can take advantage of these technologies that we have now in this time of our global pandemic and sheltering in place. You can share compassionate communication with family, friends, and coworkers as you go along and use it as an opportunity to increase generosity of heart and compassion in those different settings as you're communicating with those folks in different ways. It works very well in written communication, I might add. Sometimes I've used it when I'm sending an email, structuring a request in a way that is a way that has at its heart the intention that everyone is left feeling whole and cared for and looked out for. You can lead workshops, as I've done several times myself, as I mentioned before. That might be something that might be of interest to you. I actually led this workshop some weeks back, and some of the participants there immediately went and shared it with another group that they were working with in their local setting, and I thought that was very wonderful to know too. And lastly, you could become certified in nonviolent communication by going through the Center for Nonviolent Communication. If you look there, there are all kinds of resources that are available to help you go deeper on the path towards competency and developing your skills as a compassionate communicator and as a nonviolent communicator who can then, as a certified person, share that with others. I do it as a non-certified person, but certainly going the certified route is a viable and important option as well. I want to close by saying thank you for your participation in RUUA's annual program fund, which makes it possible for me and my colleagues who are part of the Congregational Life team to do the work that we do, including sharing workshops and programs and events and educational opportunities such as this one. And in closing, I would like to offer these words by my dear colleague, Wayne Arneson. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down, there is another truth. You are not alone. Be well, be encouraged, and take very good care.